Hi, I'm Araceli, and I was never meant to be anything more than a family joke. They called me the gatekeeper, but not out of respect. It started as a prank, a blind date, a laugh at my expense, and ended with my sister standing at a dinner table, telling everyone no man would ever want a trash sweeper like me. They laughed, until my grandfather stood up, voice trembling, and everything shifted. But that night was just the beginning. They didn't just humiliate me. They erased me, my name, my rights, my place in this family. And they thought I'd stay quiet. They thought silence meant surrender. But what they never realized was that silence can be a weapon too. What would you do if the people who raised you turned into the ones who tried to rewrite your existence? Before we dive in, let us know, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story too. The evening air in Chicago had a damp weight to it, the kind that clung to your coat and made your hair curl. I arrived at the restaurant a little late, weaving between parked cars with a paper bag of paperwork tucked under my arm. Property management doesn't stop because of family dinners, but I'd promised Grandfather Lowell I'd show up, and so I did, wearing the same black blazer I'd worn to meetings all week. The door chimed as I stepped in. The smell of roasted meat and fried onions wrapped around me, mixed with the familiar hum of my family's voices. The host pointed toward the back room, where laughter spilled through an archway. I squared my shoulders and walked in. Every table was full. Cousins I hadn't seen in months were gathered shoulder to shoulder, cocktails in hand. My sister Marla sat at the center like she always did, a silk scarf tossed over her shoulder as if she were a queen presiding over a court. She didn't look up right away, but I caught the flick of her eyes in my direction, the whisper to our cousin Blaine, the small smirk. There was no place set for me at the main table. The only open chair was pushed against the wall, right by the swinging door to the restroom. Each time it opened, the air changed, an unpleasant gust that underscored the seat's purpose. "Araceli, you made it!" Marla called out, her voice syrupy. "We were starting to think you'd bail. Again." I forced a smile. "I'm here." "Good," she said, her eyes glittering. "Meet Mason, your blind date." A man across the table blinked at me. He had kind eyes, a nervous smile, and the look of someone who'd been dragged into something. I'm just a client of your sister's," he stammered. The table erupted in laughter. Not the warm kind you join in, but sharp little bursts that land like slaps. Marla leaned in, pretending to whisper but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Well, we thought you deserved some fun. You're always working at that old house, guarding it like some gatekeeper. Somebody's gotta loosen you up." Heat crawled up my neck. I sat down slowly at the empty chair by the door. The wood felt sticky beneath my palms. The door swung open again. A stranger brushed past me, and the smell of bleach and air freshener filled my nose. Blaine snorted. "Perfect seat for the gatekeeper." I pressed my lips together, breathing through my nose. "Stay quiet," I told myself. "Don't give them more to mock." Under the table, my fingers found the cool weight of the keychain hanging from my purse. A battered brass tag, smooth from years of use. Grandfather had handed it to me when I was 22, saying, "This opens the side gate. Only you keep this one." Back then it had felt like trust. Tonight it felt like a brand. Marla's voice cut through the clatter of silverware. "No man would ever want a woman who sweeps trash for a living," she said, and though she smiled as if it were a joke, her eyes held no softness. I stared at the condensation on my water glass, my reflection rippling. They called me the gatekeeper like it was funny. They didn't see the hours I spent handling repairs, the tenants, the paperwork that kept their legacy afloat. Without me, the doors they waltzed through wouldn't even open. The restroom door swung again, knocking into the back of my chair. I steadied myself and raised my chin. Across the table, Mason looked away, embarrassed for me. I wrapped my hand tighter around the keys, the metal biting into my palm. In that moment, I made myself a promise I didn't dare say out loud. I would remember this night, every laugh, every glance, and one day, the very thing they mocked would end their sneers. I gripped the cold metal of the keys in my hand, not knowing yet they would one day silence the laughter that filled the room. The laughter died down, but the heat on my face didn't. I shifted in the chair by the restroom, adjusting the strap of my purse to keep the keys from digging into my side. Plates clinked, glasses refilled, but I sat still, afraid that even the sound of my fork might draw attention back to me. Dinner dragged on, one awkward beat at a time. Marla poured wine for the cousins across from her, laughing like the queen of a prom she never outgrew. I caught the way she subtly moved her elbow to block me out of group photos snapped by Aunt Lorraine, how she used her perfectly manicured hand to gesture around me when talking about everyone who really mattered in the family. At one point, Uncle Ron reached under his chair and pulled out a folded printout. Thick cardstock, glossy. "Here," he said, waving it. "They did a nice job with the invitation, didn't they?" He passed it down the table like a trophy. One by one they nodded, some even complimenting the gold embossing and the little family crest Marla had apparently designed herself. When it landed near me, curiosity got the better of my pride. I opened it. There, under a scripted heading, "A Night to Celebrate Our Legacy," was a long list of names: Grandfather Lowell, Marla Kendrill, and husband. Every cousin, even distant ones I barely remembered from backyard barbecues in the early 2000s. I looked twice, 3 times. My name wasn't there. Before I could shut it, Marla leaned across the table, sing-songing loud enough for half the room to hear. "Oh look, Araceli's not even on the guest list. Maybe they thought she was too busy scrubbing baseboards at the estate to show up." Laughter again. Fewer this time, but still enough to sting. I didn't look up. I stared into my water glass, watching a tiny lemon seed float aimlessly near the ice. How many times can they erase me before I finally disappear? The restaurant's warm lighting suddenly felt harsh, like stage lights revealing every scar. The linen tablecloth scratched at my wrist. I took a small sip of water, enough to swallow back the words rising like bile. That's when Carmen Deira arrived. She wasn't family, but she was close enough. An old friend of Marla's from their sorority days at Northwestern. Loud, over-accessorized, and always a little too excited to be part of our family's inner circle. She walked in mid-laughter, dropped her oversized purse on a chair, then scanned the table. Her eyes landed on me. "Oh," she said with a half-smile. "So, you're the maid, right? You keep things clean for them?" Even the server passing by slowed down, sensing the air shift. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Carmen chuckled, oblivious. Or maybe not. She turned to Marla with a wink. "Kidding. Kind of." This time it wasn't just the family laughing. It was strangers, too. Friends of the family, in-laws, old neighbors. People who didn't even know my name. My hands went to my lap. My fingers found the outline of the keyring again. My thumb traced the worn grooves of the oldest key, the one that still opened the iron gate no one else bothered with, the one I kept unlocking even when the hinges screeched in protest and the weeds crept up the fence line. They think these keys are a joke, but one day they'll see who really opens and closes the doors here. I looked at my plate, half-eaten roast chicken, congealed gravy. I wasn't hungry anymore. Across the table, Marla leaned into Carmen and whispered something. They both laughed, and I caught the word spinster in the middle of it. I could have thrown my glass, could have stood up and told them all to shove their wine glasses and their fake kindness where the sun doesn't shine. Instead, I straightened my shoulders. I've spent years opening gates, fixing leaky pipes, staying late to sort legal papers no one else could make sense of. Grandfather trusted me with the estate not because I begged, but because I earned it, quietly, steadily, But nobody gives medals for loyalty if you don't dress it up in pearls and show it off. Maybe silence is all I have left, but silence doesn't mean surrender. I looked down at the keys again. Solid, cold, mine. Someone tapped a fork to a glass, trying to make a toast. I forced a smile. I held it there like armor, even as my throat tightened. As I forced a smile, I felt something crack, not in my voice, but deep in the place where I had buried my worth. I looked around the table, not really seeing anyone, but still feeling every pair of eyes. Forks clinked against china again as conversations cautiously resumed, like nothing had happened. But something had. Something had split wide open inside me, and no one even noticed. The server returned to refill water glasses. As she leaned in to place a new napkin by my plate, I saw it before she did. Torn at the corner, a small, ragged slit no bigger than an inch, still it stood out. Everyone else had folded linens with neat corners. Mine looked like it had been dragged across a floor. She noticed, too. Hesitated. "Oh, It's fine," I cut in, voice even. She smiled awkwardly and walked off. I stared at the frayed edge, resting now in my lap. It felt like a message delivered quietly, yet unmistakably. Fitting. Torn, overlooked, discarded, like me. Marla poured herself another glass of wine. She always drank white, said red stained her teeth. She took a sip, then tapped her nail against the glass twice. A few people glanced her way, and that was all she needed. She tilted her head, all casual charm and pretend innocence. "You know," she began, looking straight at me, "I was just thinking, no man would ever want you, Araceli." The room tensed again. A slow silence. Someone cleared their throat. A fork dropped. I didn't blink. She continued, now fully committed. "I mean, come on. Who marries the maid of the family?" This time, the laughter wasn't explosive. It was worse. It was controlled, knowing. The kind of laughter that simmers just under the surface, feeding on cruelty that's been practiced. A few cousins chuckled softly, clearly uncomfortable but too spineless to speak. Others avoided eye contact entirely. I sat perfectly still, the napkin tight in my grip. My thumb rubbed over the torn edge like it was rosary bead, as if enough friction might keep me from coming apart. It wasn't just words. It was a verdict, handed down by the people who should have been my shelter. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't cursed. And somehow, that made it all sharper. That line, "No man would ever want you," wasn't just a jab. It went straight for the softest place inside me, the one I kept hidden even from myself. She knew. Of course she knew. I hadn't dated anyone seriously in years. I spent my time fixing water heaters, balancing estate accounts, driving out to meet tenants who locked themselves out. I hadn't worn a dress without pockets in ages. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see romance. I saw responsibility. But that didn't mean I didn't want it. Or wonder if I was even capable of it anymore. I dug my nails into my palm under the table. Hard. Anything to stop the sting from rising to my eyes. What hurt more than the words was the silence that followed them. Nobody corrected her. Nobody said, "Hey, that's too far." They just sat with it. I looked down at the torn napkin again. That tiny flaw, so easy to ignore, so easy to discard. Like me. I could have stood up. I could have grabbed my purse, tossed my water in her face like in those old TV dramas. But that's what she wanted. A scene. Something to roll her eyes at and say, "See? Told you she was unstable." Not yet. If I walk away now, they win. If I explode, I give them the theater they're waiting for. So I sat. I breathed. And I folded the torn napkin gently into a square. A perfect, quiet square with a flaw nobody saw but me. The clink of forks returned. More wine poured. Marla was already laughing at something else, already on to her next show. I stayed invisible. That's what they were comfortable with. Me, serving in silence. But inside, something shifted. I remembered the night I paid off the plumbing bill when the pipes burst in the east wing and no one else answered the emergency call. I remembered covering Blaine's rent one winter when he gambled away his savings and begged me not to tell grandfather. I remembered patching holes in the guest house roof by myself at midnight so no one's weekend plans would be ruined. I built their comfort with my silence, and silence was the noose around my own throat. I glanced across the table. Grandfather wasn't there. He'd skipped this gathering, claiming fatigue. But I wondered now if maybe he knew. Maybe he didn't have the strength to sit and watch them treat me like this. Or maybe he'd just given up trying to stop them. I couldn't blame him. But I wasn't him. I looked at the torn napkin again. Still in my lap. Still mine. I held the torn napkin in my lap, and for the first time, I wasn't just ashamed. I was waiting. The torn napkin sat like a flag of surrender in my lap. But I wasn't surrendering. Not this time. My hands stayed still on the linen, but inside, something was shifting. I wasn't just swallowing shame anymore. I was storing it, filing it away. Forks clinked again, the hum of conversation returned, trying to drown out what had just happened. But the words Marla threw across the table still floated in the air like smoke from a fire that refused to go out. No man would ever want me. Her voice had landed with a cold finality, like she was stamping some label on my forehead. And then, something I didn't expect happened. The creak of a chair scraping the floor startled the table. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it silenced the whispers like a switch had been flipped. My grandfather was standing. I turned my head slowly, not quite believing it. He leaned on his cane, one hand trembling slightly from the weight of age or anger. Maybe both. His eyes scanned the table, not with fury, but with something heavier, disappointment, maybe even shame, but not toward me. "Enough," he said. Just that, one word, firm but soft, like a door clicking shut. He looked directly at Marla, his face lined deep with time. "She's the one who holds the keys to this house." A hush fell over us like a dropped curtain. No one moved. The laughter, the smirks, the cruel delight, all vanished. My cousin Shelby's fork hovered midair. The man Marla had paraded as my blind date shifted uncomfortably and looked down at his plate. I didn't move either. For the first time all evening, my throat burned, not from humiliation, but from the sheer shock of being seen. I blinked, and moisture I hadn't planned on gathered in the corners of my eyes. Keys. My fingers found them through the leather of my purse, the old brass ones, heavy with years of use and meaning. I carried them everywhere. Not just because they unlocked the gate of our family estate, but because they were the one thing that still tied me to something solid in this family. Now, in this moment, they felt heavier than ever. Not burdensome, but significant. If he remembered, maybe I wasn't as invisible as they wanted me to believe. I dared a glance across the table. Marla's expression had stiffened, the corners of her mouth twitching as if to hold back whatever biting comment she had prepped next. But she didn't speak, not yet. And then, just as we all sat suspended in that awkward air, someone's glass cracked. A sharp, unexpected pop. It came from across the table. Aunt Clarine had been gripping the stem of her wineglass a little too tightly. It hadn't shattered, but a long, jagged line now curved down the side of the bowl. The wine inside shifted with the shock, a deep red against the fracture like a cut just below the skin. She gasped, pulled her hand back, and grabbed a napkin. Everyone looked, startled, but no one spoke. The sound echoed in my head longer than it should have. That crack. It was us. A family dressed in holiday clothes and polite smiles, pretending everything was fine. But underneath the surface, just beneath the gloss, we were already breaking. The glass wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time the break was visible to everyone. Marla leaned back, finally finding her tongue. Her voice came quiet, tight. "Old words, old man," she said to our grandfather. "You can't keep doors locked forever." It wasn't loud, but the jab was real. He didn't answer. He slowly lowered himself back into his chair, settling like someone who had already said everything that needed saying. I could feel eyes darting between him and me. The keychain in my purse seemed to hum against my leg. For a second, I thought about pulling it out and placing it on the table, like a trump card. But no, I stayed still. Let them sit with it. A few of the cousins started talking again, shallow, meaningless things to fill the silence. Weather, sports, a vacation in Phoenix. But no one dared look directly at me, except Marla. Her gaze never left me. Not sharp anymore, but narrow, calculating. I recognized that look. It wasn't over. She wasn't done. And neither was I. The rest of the dinner crawled by, each course heavier than the last. I barely tasted the chicken marsala on my plate. I smiled politely when addressed, nodded when needed, but my mind wasn't with them anymore. It had curled inward, replaying grandfather's words over and over. She's the one who holds the keys. Simple, but they meant everything. After dessert, a dry slice of carrot cake, I excused myself to the restroom, not because I needed it, but because I needed air. I stood inside the stall, leaned my forehead gently against the cool tile, and just breathed. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding in. Maybe silence was all I had left. But silence didn't mean surrender. It meant strategy. On my way back to the table, I passed the cracked wine glass again. Someone had set it off to the side, replaced now with a new one. But I stopped, just for a second, ran my finger lightly along the break, not touching, just tracing. That was us. We kept replacing things instead of fixing them. I returned to my seat, sat down, and waited. The silence after his words was heavy, but in Marla's narrowed eyes, I saw the storm gathering again. Marla didn't need to shout to draw attention. Her silence was already pulling focus. Her fingers moved with slow precision, unzipping the leather of her handbag like she was performing for a small stage. A smug flicker passed over her face as she pulled out an envelope, thick and too deliberate to be casual. I felt something twist inside me. The envelope landed on the table with a dull thud. The sound barely registered above the quiet clinking of silverware and soft jazz spilling from the restaurant speakers, but it felt seismic in my chest. She leaned back in her chair like a queen unveiling a decree. "If anyone's confused about where things stand," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "I thought it'd be helpful to bring clarity." I should have stood up and walked out then, but I stayed seated, my palms slick against my lap. She pulled out the documents and spread them across the white linen like cards in a rigged game. The top page bore a familiar heading in clean serif font: Vayner Estate Trust Agreement, Amendment Form. Amendment. That word hit like a slap. I didn't have to read every line to understand what she was doing. "See here," she said, pointing with her manicured finger. "The board met last month. Official reallocation of all administrative rights. Grandfather signed." She emphasized the last word like a dagger. Her eyes flicked to him. He didn't move. His face was unreadable, either stunned or too tired to fight. Or maybe he already knew. Someone across the table let out a breath, sharp and fast. A cousin leaned closer to the page, squinting. "Wait, is Araceli's name even here?" Marla beamed. "That's the point. It's not." My breath stalled. "It's nothing personal," she added, twisting the knife with a smile. "Just business. The estate needs fresh leadership. You know, someone who's not emotionally attached to the side gate." The room went quiet again. Not because they were outraged, but because no one knew where to look. Some studied their wine. Others folded their napkins too carefully. One uncle coughed into his fist. I stared down at the spread of papers. The black ink seemed to vibrate under the restaurant lights. My name, my position, my connection. It had all been stripped from the page like I never existed. It was one thing to be laughed at. It was another to be erased. Legal filings can be reversed, I muttered, mostly to myself, unsure if I believed it. But it wasn't about legality now. It was about the quiet cheer that rippled through my family like they'd just watched the final act of a well-scripted play. And then, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years leaned in, close enough that I could feel her breath. She wasn't cruel, not usually. That's why it stung worse. "You don't belong here, Araceli," she whispered. "You never really did." I looked at her. "What did you say?" She blinked, as if realizing she'd said it out loud. But she didn't take it back. It was the final confirmation of a truth I'd tried to push down for years. I was useful to them, but never one of them. The laughter earlier, that was cheap entertainment. This was rewriting the story, without me in it. I sat back, the torn napkin still tucked in my lap like a silent witness. My fingers found the keychain in my pocket again. Its weight grounded me, reminded me that while they tore up paper, they hadn't yet changed the locks. The cold metal pressed into my skin as I closed my hand around it. They didn't know everything. They didn't know what I had tucked away in that old file cabinet in the back of the estate office. They didn't know the name on the deed to the auxiliary property. They didn't even know I had a signed letter from grandfather, dated 2 years ago, outlining temporary control while he was in treatment. It wasn't much. But maybe it was enough to keep me from drowning. "Araceli," Marla chirped from across the table. "You look pale. Are you all right?" I smiled, because what else was there to do? But my smile didn't reach my eyes. It was the same one I wore when a tenant cursed at me over a broken boiler, or when a contractor tried to skip a permit inspection. It was the one I wore when I buried my mother, and no one asked how I was holding up because they were too busy arguing about the will. I picked up one of the papers, eyes skimming the lines. Marla leaned forward again. "There's really no point reading it now. Everything's been processed." I looked up. "Has it?" She paused. That hesitation gave me just enough air to breathe. "I guess we'll see," I said softly. Sometimes paperwork gets misfiled. A few people blinked. Someone snorted, amused by the attempt at bravado. But I wasn't trying to be bold. I was surviving. That's what I'd always done, even when they didn't see it. Even when they tried to cut me out, I wasn't gone yet. Marla gathered the papers back into the envelope like she was cleaning up a board game she'd already won. Her voice floated across the table. "Well, I think that settles things." And then, just as I reached for my glass, my hand shook, barely, but enough that it bumped the stem. The wine glass tipped. A small crack echoed in the quiet. It didn't shatter. It didn't spill. Just a clean fracture, like a scar opening along a fault line that had always been there. I looked down at the crack in the glass, and something inside me mirrored it. That's what this family was. Smooth on the outside, but all of us full of hairline breaks. Marla's papers lay on the table like weapons, and for the first time I realized they weren't just laughing anymore. They were rewriting me out of existence. I didn't remember walking out of the restaurant. One minute I was staring at Marla's smug face, and the next I was unlocking my front door with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. The keys slipped once. I caught them mid-air. Some part of me took that as a sign. Not everything had to hit the floor. The house was too quiet, too neat. I'd left the hallway light on, maybe hoping I wouldn't return to darkness. Shoes off, coat draped over the chair, I stood for a long minute in the center of the living room, staring at nothing. My purse was still heavy with the weight of those keys, but my chest felt hollow. Emptied. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't even sit. My feet took me down the hallway almost without thinking, past the guest room, past the linen closet, straight to the door I hadn't opened in over 4 years, my father's study. The hinges let out a quiet groan as I pushed it open. The room smelled faintly of cedar and something older, something like memory. The desk stood where it always had, solid and serious beneath the window. Dust coated its surface, but the chair was just slightly askew, as if someone had only recently left it. I hadn't touched this room since the funeral. I couldn't. That man had died with more of my heart than I'd realized. I approached slowly, running my fingertips across the surface. My thumb brushed a groove in the wood. I remembered the night he'd carved it with the edge of a broken fountain pen, said it reminded him that some flaws didn't need fixing. I don't know what I was looking for. Comfort, maybe. A reason. A scrap of my old life that hadn't been poisoned. When I opened the middle drawer, the scent hit me first. Paper and time. Then my hand touched something smooth, an envelope sealed and yellowed at the edges. My name was written across the front in his handwriting, shaky but familiar. Araceli. My breath caught in my throat. I sat down. My hands trembled as I peeled the flap open. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper folded in thirds. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to say what I should have told you while I could. You were never meant to be the gatekeeper by accident. I asked for it. You kept that house running when no one else even noticed. They will never understand the weight you carry, because they never had to carry anything at all. But I saw it. I chose you because I trusted you. You are not their servant. You are this family's spine. I blinked hard. The ink blurred. Don't let them make you feel small, Hija. You hold the keys, not just to the gate, to the future. The page fluttered slightly in my grip, like it was breathing. I held it to my chest, whispering, Papa. That was the first time in years I let myself cry. It didn't last long. A sharp buzz from my phone broke the silence. Unknown number. I nearly let it ring through, but something in me answered. Hello? Araceli, it's Daniel. His voice was low, urgent. I just got wind of something. I didn't want you to be blindsided. Daniel Dara. He'd gone to law school with Marla's first husband, but he'd always been kind to me, one of the few who didn't treat me like background noise. What is it? I asked. They're building a case to have you declared unfit to manage anything related to the estate. They've filed preliminary motions. I don't have details yet, but I've seen the docket. My mouth went dry. Unfit? I echoed. They're arguing negligence, financial irresponsibility, emotional instability, all bogus, of course, but the documents have been submitted. You need to prepare. He paused, then added more softly, This isn't just petty anymore, Araceli. This is war. I ended the call without saying much else. I didn't have words, not yet. But when I looked down at the letter again, the words were already there. My father's voice, clear as if he were still in the room. You are this family's spine. I folded the paper and slid it back into its envelope, tucking it inside the desk drawer, not to hide it, but to protect it. I would need it soon. In the hallway, the light flickered overhead. I flipped the switch off, walked back into the living room, and stood still again. Only this time, not as a woman shattered, but one beginning to rebuild. They'd made their move. Now it was my turn. I didn't know yet how I'd fight, but I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. My father's letter wasn't just words. It was ammunition, and for the first time in years, I knew I wasn't walking into this war empty-handed. The next morning, I awoke with the kind of weight in my chest that didn't come from lack of sleep. It came from knowing you were expected to stand trial where everyone else already assumed your guilt. Marla's message had come in late the night before, disguised as kindness. Brunch at grandfather's, just us. Let's clear the air. I almost laughed. The last time we cleared the air, she left me gasping for it. Still, I showed up. Not because I believed anything would change, but because I had something in my pocket they didn't know about yet. I drove in silence, the road to the old house narrowing with every turn, trees arching like a tunnel, as if nature itself was bracing me. When I stepped into the sunroom, the smell of overripe fruit and polished wood hit me first, and then the stillness. Too still. They were already seated, Marla in her pressed linen blazer, legs crossed like a magazine ad, cousin Silas nursing a mug of something that steamed but didn't soothe. Carmen, leaning too comfortably into a chair that had never been hers to begin with, and Orrin Laskett, the family's attorney, was there too, stiff and overly polite. Grandfather wasn't in sight. That alone made my stomach twist. "Araceli," Marla said, her voice syrupy, fake. "Glad you could come." I nodded, lowering myself into the last open seat. Didn't know brunch required a legal presence these days. "We just want clarity," Silas said, not meeting my eyes. I didn't speak. I'd learned that silence made people uncomfortable, made them fill it. Orrin cleared his throat. "There have been concerns raised about the handling of estate matters." "Concerns?" I raised an eyebrow. Marla smiled too widely. "You've been involved for so long. Maybe too long." And there it was. She reached under the table and pulled out a folder, then slid it in front of me with theatrical grace. "You'll see here. Expenditures that don't align. Transfers. Missing records." I didn't even open it. "You're accusing me of stealing?" I asked, steady. "You siphoned money," Marla said flatly. "We can't trust someone who hides behind old keys and dusty titles." That was the moment I felt it. The thinnest thread snap inside my chest. Not rage. Not yet. Just the realization that they had never needed a real reason. They just needed a story. A paper trail. Something they could hand to a judge or whisper over cocktails. I thought of all the times I'd signed checks to repair the barn roof, paid utilities no one else noticed, quietly covered fees when Silas's name was on the overdue taxes. But that wasn't what mattered now. I was guilty the moment I walked in. Before I could speak, someone moved behind me. A shuffle. A throat clearing. "Excuse me," came a voice, raspy but firm. Jonah. The groundskeeper. A man with more years on the estate than most of us had in the family. Marla rolled her eyes. "This isn't—" "She didn't take anything," Jonah said, voice rising above the tension. "You want to talk about who kept the place running? Look at her. Not you." Orrin tried to intervene. "Sir, this isn't— I've seen who signs the paychecks, who makes the calls when the pipes burst or the fence breaks. It's her. Every damn time." The room froze. Marla's face drained, then flushed crimson. Carmen shifted uncomfortably. Silas looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. I turned slightly, caught Jonah's eye, nodded. But even then, Carmen muttered, not to me but loud enough, "Gatekeeper. More like gatecrasher." It hit harder than it should have. Not because I believed her, but because I could tell she believed it. I sat forward, laying my palms on the table. "You want me gone so badly you've convinced yourselves I'm a threat." No one responded. I took a breath. "You think you can erase a person because you're louder, because you file more papers. But I have proof. I have history, and I have him." Marla narrowed her eyes. "Him who?" I reached into my coat and touched the envelope, still unopened in this room, still carrying the scent of my father's desk. I didn't pull it out, not yet, but I let her see that I wasn't bluffing, and that scared her more than anything else. I stood, voice even, heart pounding. "You want a tribunal? Fine. But don't expect me to play defendant when the only thing I'm guilty of is showing up when no one else would." They didn't answer. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one on trial. I stood, my father's letter burning in my pocket, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the gatekeeper. They did. Even before I sat back down, I could feel the shift. The air in the room had thickened, not with anticipation, but with fear. And not mine. Marla's smile had vanished, replaced with a tightened jaw and darting eyes. Oren looked down at the table, fussing with a pen that had no cap. Even Silas cleared his throat, like something bitter had lodged in it. But I didn't speak. I waited. Evening had crept in without anyone noticing. The light outside was now golden, filtering in through the lace curtains like truth easing its way into a house too long soaked in shadows. Marla was the first to break the silence. If we're going to finish this, let's finish it properly. She stood, pulled a manila envelope from her bag, and handed it to Oren. Go ahead, she said. He adjusted his glasses and opened the folder with the kind of reverence reserved for evidence. This, he said, sliding out a document, is a notarized agreement, signed by Araceli herself. Years ago. In it, she relinquishes any claim to the estate. He laid it out on the table like a trump card. Marla folded her arms. It proves, she said, her voice high and tight, that she's not just unfit. She doesn't even belong here. The moment stretched. Carmen actually gasped. Silas leaned forward like he was watching a courtroom drama, which I suppose, in a way, he was. I didn't touch the paper. I just looked at it. I knew that document, or at least I recognized the bones of it, the layout, the phrasing. It had once been a lease I'd signed when I helped my father manage a rental property, but the date was wrong. The context twisted. My signature copied and pasted into betrayal. You know, I said quietly, if I was so irrelevant, why forge my name to erase me? That stopped her. A beat. Then two. She blinked. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the envelope. The letter. My father's handwriting still steady despite the years, his words clearer than anyone else's in that room. I unfolded it carefully, like scripture, and read aloud. She is the quiet strength this house depends on. The keys are hers by right. The room stilled. I laid both documents side by side, the forged and the real, and pointed out the mismatched dates, the type of ink used, the slanted signature that had always tilted right, now somehow straightened by convenience. You wanted me gone, I said, but you wanted my name to do it. Jonah nodded from the corner, lips tight with vindication. But it wasn't until the cane struck the floor, twice, that the room truly broke open. Grandfather had entered without anyone noticing. He stood at the archway, shoulders shaking from something deeper than age. He looked at Marla, then at me, then at the table. I may be old, he said, his voice cracking but steady, but I know betrayal when I see it. He walked forward, slow but deliberate, until he stood by my chair. This girl, this trash sweeper, as you so kindly mocked her, she's the one who holds the keys to this house. Not because I gave them to her, because she earned them. The silence in that room could have shattered glass. Marla paled. Oren stammered. There must have been a clerical. Save it, Grandfather snapped, his hand slamming down on the forged paper. This house isn't built on signatures. It's built on service, loyalty, and she, he pointed to me, has done more for this family than all of you combined. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I only folded the letter, tucked it into my bag, and stood. Carmen looked down. Silas mumbled something I didn't bother to catch. Oren gathered his things in silence. Jonah gave me the smallest nod, a nod I returned. Marla? She didn't move. I met her eyes one last time. You thought silence made me weak, I said. But silence was my strength. I was waiting for the right word. And in that silence, Marla finally realized she wasn't just losing control of the estate, she was losing me forever. When I walked out of that room, the echoes didn't follow me. No slamming doors, no raised voices chasing my heels, just silence. And for the first time in a long time, it was mine. The days that followed felt oddly weightless, as if some invisible pressure had been lifted from my shoulders. I slept, though not deeply. I ate, though not hungrily. My body moved through the rhythms of recovery, while my mind waded through memory. Whispers spread fast across the family. Marla was conspicuously absent from brunches, birthdays, even Sunday visits. No one said it aloud, but the guilt clung to her name like smoke. Some claimed she'd left town. Others said she was consulting lawyers, trying to recover what she never really lost: control. But when the forged document was quietly discredited, thanks in part to Jonah's testimony and a very thorough notary record, those rumors dried up like a stream in summer. Orrin Laskett sent a short, formal letter to the family 3 days later, resigning as counsel. "Professional conflict," he wrote. I figured he meant professional embarrassment. I didn't care enough to reply. That Sunday, I found myself sitting once again at my father's old desk. The air in the room was warm from the late morning sun, filtering through the blinds like golden lace. The framed letter rested on the corner of the desk, its presence quiet but unwavering. I traced the edge of the frame with my fingertip. All these years, I thought silence made me invisible. But maybe silence had taught me something else: how to observe, to hold still, to endure, to wait until the words mattered. The wound hadn't disappeared. I still felt it, tucked beneath the ribs, dull but insistent. But it no longer defined me. It didn't steer me. That weight now had shape, and because of that, it had boundaries. It stayed where I allowed it. Later that week, I walked the gravel path down to the garden, where Grandfather Lowell sat beneath the old pecan tree, wrapped in his blanket, his cane resting against the bench beside him. He didn't look up when I sat. We just sat there for a while, watching a squirrel dig like it was searching for something lost a decade ago. "I won't be here much longer," he said eventually, voice low and even. I turned to him, but he kept his eyes on the squirrel. "But when I go," he continued, "remember, keys mean responsibility, not chains." His words landed heavier than any confession. For years, I'd carried those keys like they were shackles, proof I belonged, evidence I mattered. Now I understood. They were never meant to weigh me down, just remind me where I stood. I nodded, swallowing back the sting in my throat. "I know." He finally looked at me. "Then you're ready." That evening, I saw Marla. I had stopped by the old market for some lemons, nothing poetic, just a craving, and there she was, standing near the bakery section, her eyes scanning the shelves like they owed her something. She looked up and froze when she saw me. No words passed between us. Her blouse was wrinkled, her expression hollow. The spark she used to wield so casually was gone, replaced with something quieter. Maybe regret. Maybe just shame. I didn't stop. But as I passed her, I said calmly, "You don't need to be locked out for me to step forward. I'm not keeping score anymore." She didn't answer, and I didn't expect her to. That night, I returned home and unlocked the front door, the same one I'd walked through for decades, keys always clenched in my hand, like proof of belonging. I walked to the wooden hook by the entryway. The keys felt heavier than usual, but not because they burdened me, because they didn't anymore. I lifted them gently and hung them on the hook. Let them rest. I still had the letter, still had the truth, still had the strength that didn't need to clang around on a keyring to be real. I looked around the house, not for signs of intrusion, but for peace. For once, I found it. And in laying down those keys, I finally unlocked myself.